In May 1940, the unthinkable happened. Hitler's advancing army surprised everyone by bypassing the Maginot Line of fortifications that was supposed to defend France and quickly marched through the supposedly impenetrable Ardennes forest. Hundreds of thousands of British and French troops were stranded on the northern coast of France around Dunkirk. Churchill developed a plan of evacuation that, at very best, might have been able to rescue about 40,000 of those troops before the rest were completely annihilated. In the midst of this completely impossible situation, a British naval officer cabled to his superiors 3 words: but if not. But if not. Now, people were very biblically literate in those days, and therefore that naval officer would know that his superiors would recognize that those 3 words were coming directly out of the King James Bible, the book of Daniel, the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. As you'll recall, King Nebuchadnezzar had put out a decree that all were either to worship his statue or they were to be cast into a fiery furnace. And so these 3 followers of God announced to King Nebuchadnezzar, if our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up. And as you'll no doubt remember, God did save them from the fiery furnace. That day they did get in the furnace, but not even one of their hairs got singed. So what does that story have, why does it have significance for that very impossible situation in May of 1940? It seems that that naval officer who cabled that message believed that God could save them from that situation, but at the same time he made it clear, but if not, they would not surrender to the oncoming forces, and in fact, they would not, under any circumstances, surrender to the horrors of Nazism and all the cruelties that that meant, even if they paid for it with their lives. Now, and what happened, as you all likely remember, the king then declared a day of prayer. And so millions of people packed themselves into churches all around the country, and they prayed fervently. And as you'll no doubt recall, over the next 8 days, a series of totally unexpected events took place. Hitler made a choice to not send the forces further in, let the Air Force handle it, and then the Air Force had a lot of trouble. The Luftwaffe had a lot of trouble dealing with the situation because of various weather conditions. They couldn't really take off. They couldn't see their target because of dense clouds. The prevailing winds were unusually favorable for small boats to be able to come right up to the coast in Dunkirk. And we know then that thousands, we think about 68,000, I believe, little and large boats made their way back and forth from England to Dunkirk. And with the result of all of this, at the end of 9 days, 9 miraculous days, over 38,000 let's get this one straight. We have to give God full credit here. 338,000 troops were rescued. Nearly the entire Allied forces were rescued and brought safely back to England. Now, how does that connect to that incredible passage that we just heard read from the book of Hebrews, the faith chapter 11? In that reading, we were reminded of some incredible miracles. Think about Moses and the people of Israel being trapped between the world's most powerful army and the Red Sea. Does that sound at all familiar? Well, God parted the Red Sea. And we also heard about the falling of the mighty walls of Jericho. We heard about David surviving unscathed in the lion's den. Many other incredible stories of faith, people believing in God, and how they were miraculously saved from all sorts of terrible circumstances. But was that all? We were also reminded of people who also had incredible faith, but they did not get rescued in the midst of trouble. In their lifetimes, they endured torture, mocking, and terrible deaths. Now those were the ones who said to God, "But if not." And are we willing to do likewise? Now, in that incredible chapter, Hebrews 11, we learn that it was by faith that these incredible miracles took place, but it was also by faith that people were able to withstand incredible challenges. It says that some even refused to be rescued, since they were holding out for a better resurrection. What does that mean? It meant that they were holding out for something in the next life that was going to be so much greater, giving them that faith, that courage to persevere regardless of circumstances. And the writer of Hebrews says, the world was not worthy of them. So in other words, far from thinking, well, they didn't have enough faith, and that's why they didn't get rescued. The writer of Hebrews makes it very clear. The world was not worthy of them. These were people of incredible integrity and faith, and they held firm in that faith, regardless of their circumstances. So what can we learn from all of this? Yes, God does perform miracles. We probably can all think in our lives of small and maybe really big ones that God has performed in our lives. But we also know that the life of faith in following Jesus was never supposed to be easy. We're told, also by the writer of Hebrews, that we're to run with perseverance the race that is set before us. So in other words, whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, and if you're like me sometimes, it feels as though you're being pressed in on every side. There are moments where it just feels as though every circumstance in your life is challenging, not to mention the world all around us. There are those moments where you feel as though everything is challenging and where is God? I don't know if any of you have ever felt that, but how do you hang on to your faith when it seems that God is not coming through, He's not delivering, He's not changing your circumstances, and you're just right in it? How can anyone possibly keep their faith in the middle of a challenging race? Now, has anybody here ever run in a race, by any chance? No need to put up hands, but I'd have to say that I've never run in anything longer than about 3 miles, and that seemed mighty long. And I remember in this race, probably from about a mile onward, there were people strategically placed all along. They keep yelling, "You're almost there!" You're almost there. And that's really what kept me upright and kept me going. But that's really what we've got to be saying to each other. You're almost there. We've got to be saying it to ourselves. We've got to be saying it to each other. We've got to be looking for that incredible future that we have in front of us. But the bottom line is, where do we get that hope? Where do we get that faith? We've got to look to Jesus as the example of how we can keep faith, regardless of our circumstances. I want to point something out interesting. That is that the writer of Hebrews told us that we're running a race. We have to persevere in that race. Life is a race. That word race, actually from the Greek, comes from the Greek word agona, which is actually the same root word that the word agony comes from. So it's very clear that the race, the race of life that we're all in right now, it's not meant to be smooth. It's from that word agony. That is what we're to expect. If we're looking to Jesus as our example, what could be more clear? What could be greater agony than to go through a Roman crucifixion? Not to mention just the horrific pain, but also the shame. the abandoning. But the passage tells us that Jesus looked beyond all of that to the joy that was set before him. Having accomplished the work his Father had called him to do, to sacrifice himself in a cosmic fight against good and evil, he would go to sit down at the right hand of the Father, and he would bask in his Father's love for all eternity and open that way for us as well. Now, the recipients of that letter that we heard, if we think that we have challenging times, the recipients of that letter faced at all times the very real possibility of their death in horrible ways, of their martyrdom. And so for them to hear about joy in the next life, that could be a very imminent comfort. But what about the rest of us? Is it enough to be thinking that we'll have joy in the next life? Is that enough to get us through the discomforts of this life? Is it not maybe a bit more comfortable to think about other ways of doing that? Maybe just to numb the pain a little bit by all the various things that we can do, the various comforts of this life that we can try to surround ourselves with, all the way from watching Netflix to enjoying a cocktail. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but in essence, to be finding comfort in working hard or in looking great or whatever it is that we might think might buffet us a little bit from the challenges that we're in right now. So is that it? Is it enough to just try to stay comfortable right now? The answer is, if we're expecting that God will reward our faith with comfort in this life, we're likely to be disappointed. We're going to hear that very shortly in the Eucharist this morning. We're going to hear the words, "Living among us, Jesus loved us. He broke bread with outcasts and sinners, healed the sick, and proclaimed good news to the poor. He yearned to draw all the world to himself, yet we were heedless of his call to walk in love." So if we choose to walk in Jesus' way of love, we can expect challenges. As in today's gospel reading, we're likely to find ourselves out of step with the world, even perhaps with our own family. But we can take comfort in knowing that if we persevere, that we're in great company. And what does it mean to be surrounded by a great crowd of witnesses? I think probably all of us can remember some remarkable people that we've known who managed, despite difficult circumstances, managed to hold on to their faith. I had one particular friend who, after a long fight with breast cancer, managed throughout all of that to hold firm in her faith. And in her dying moments, when she was no longer able to speak, she clearly saw something beautiful. She reached out her hands, eyes wide open, joyous expression on her face. Shortly after her death, a close friend of hers had an image of her, an image of great joy, in which she said, "It is so peaceful here." And I think we have that. We have that as an assurance. We have that in the crowd of witnesses, those that we've known, those who've gone ahead of us, those who prevailed in their faith despite their circumstances. What a path they have made for us in which we can walk now. And so, following that lesson today, if we can hold on to Jesus as the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, if we can remember the example of those who walked in faith before us, then this can give us the hope that we need to be able to hold on to our faith for the rest of our lives, regardless of our circumstances, and to know that we have that assurance that Jesus is with us, now through our circumstances, and even more so in the life to come. And for this we can say, thanks be to God. Amen.